Hi, it's T with Teaquilts, and I'm here today to do another block for you. This one is a string block that's called Diamonds Are Forever, and it's in a book called String Quilt Revival by Virginia Baker and Barbara Sanders. So this pattern is actually an old pattern, and it's been used a lot, but in the instructions, one of the things that it asks for is phone book paper to make your base pattern on for this particular string quilt. And I don't have any phone book paper in my vicinity right now. I'm sure I have some in the house that I could find. But what I do have is the Warm and Natural batting paper that comes in between the batting layers when you buy Warm and Natural by the yardage. And instead of going to look for the phone book paper, and this is right at my hands because I do use it when I die cut sometimes with my geometric shapes. So I decided that I would use this paper instead. So I need a 6.5 inch square. So what I'm going to do is just roll off some of this paper. And I'm using a rotary cutter that is for paper because I don't want to use my good blade, just to whack off a piece. And then I take the long paper and just fold it in half. And I'm trying to make sure the edges are even. And then I just fold it in half again just to make it a manageable size for me to get under my rulers. Okay. So then once I have that, I need a 6.5 inch piece of phone book paper. So I'm just going to use my 6.5 inch ruler, line up the edge, make sure I've got it plumb down here on the bottom, and I'm just going to cut a 6.5 inch strip of paper. And then from there, I think it would be a lot easier to unfold the paper to cut 6 inch squares. So I'm actually going to make sure my pieces are lined up. Put my 6.5 inch wide ruler back on the paper. I'm going to cut up one side and then cut up the other side. So that's how you would cut your 6.5 inch squares. And I opted to do this instead of using typing paper because I did not want to use my typing paper. Unless you're recycling the typing paper, it's fine. But this paper is a little bit thinner, and so I would recommend doing it this way instead. So I will just continue to cut as many 6.5 inch squares as I need. For this pattern, I only need to cut 2 squares, but I thought I would show that to you anyway. I'm actually going to be working on a lecture for string quilting, so I'm going to do a few extra blocks for some technique differences. So I will get myself prepared to do the block, and I will be right back. I'm back, and I have my supplies that I need to make my Diamonds Are Forever block. It says for my star point fabric, I need a 3.5 by 10 inch rectangle. So I have just cut a stack of those. I only need 2 blocks, but I'm doing a few extras for a lecture. And then from there, I need just assorted strings. So they do recommend that the strings are 1 to 2 inches because the block is small. So they don't really recommend using large pieces. So we're going to talk about that as well. So over in this stack, I just want to talk about when you make string quilts that there are a few tips that might help you. If you see this fabric strip, when I'm folding it in half at the fold, it is not straight. Matter of fact, it has choppy edges here. I don't worry about screwing anything up because when I place the next piece of fabric, I can angle it away from that. And so I hope that doing this piecing, I'll be able to show you some of that. I also use leftover pieces from projects where I may have a seam in the fabric. In this particular quilt, it does not matter. I will even use pieces that have already been strip pieced for a previous project. Those are also fair game. So in a string quilt, almost anything is acceptable. And this is just another piece that's been pieced that has jaggy edges. And then when I get down here, I have this like really narrow piece that probably wouldn't be but 1/8 of an inch when it's seamed in. So I just get rid of that part. So just to get it out of my way. And then sometimes I may have where I've pieced blocks, maybe for 9-patch blocks or some sort of sashing. And I would just take these and cut these in the opposite direction to make these units smaller. So let's do a couple of those. And again, I'm not worried about being square. I'm just cutting various widths of pieces to be used in the blocks. And I may not use them all here, but they'll be used in some other project. So I think 3 for right now is a good number. And my last tip for using fabrics is when you get to the edges of blocks, when you're making string quilts, and let's say that you've pieced everything and you've gotten down to this corner. And then we try to find another piece to fit there. And sometimes it may look like it fit, but then when you stitch it, it might be just a tad short. The way that I avoid that is when I get down to my corners, I just use extra half square triangles that I've accumulated by either sewing strips on the diagonal for binding, borders, or any of the flip and sew techniques. I just keep those. Sometimes I sew them together and make half square triangles, and a lot of times I use them when I'm doing strip blocks that are on the diagonal when I get into the corners, because I know that the right angle is the shape of the corner. So I am going to start with making the block. So I just want to get my pieces back in order. So the first step that I need to do is cut this black strip using this template here. So I am going to copy this onto a piece of paper and I'm going to cut it out. So here's my paper, and I'm just going to again use my paper rotary cutting blade and cut out this template. Now I am not going to make a plastic template because I don't think that it's super critical that it be 100% accurate, but I am going to take 2 pieces, lay them together, and then, so I guess it's not supposed to go in the corner, so it's not set. This piece of fabric is not big enough for it to be placed in the corner so that we have a right angle. I was hoping that we could cut it so that we would have straight edges there, but that's not how it's designed. So we will just lay the template right on top, and then we will cut those out. So I am going to switch over to my rotating mat for that. And I should be using my paper blade because I may have a few chunks of paper that might come off. I seen that I needed to redo that, so I switched to my paper blade. Just in case, because we don't want to dull a very good blade. So there is 2 of my pieces. I will continue to cut these out and I will come back when I'm ready to go to the next step. So the next step is to place my corner unit in and go diagonally across the corner. Now if you need to, you can go ahead and press this with a dry iron to make it lay flat. But I'm just going to put a few pins in for the sake of the video so I can keep rolling here. I did lay them under a heavy stack of books to flatten them out earlier, so that's why they're not as rolly as they were before. So I've got my edges aligned in the corners, and then I'm just going to make sure that my tip goes through the corner up here, and I'm just going to place another pin. So I have 2 pins in my corner. Now the next step is to take pieces of fabric that are long enough to sew on and do the sew and flip method. So I just want to place my fabric here. And again, if I need to, because I'm not at my ironing station, I'll just go ahead and plop a couple of pins in. To hold it. And so I will do that to at least 1 more. Get a couple more pins. Again, I start down in the corner. To hold that position, that is the most critical pinpoint, is down in that corner. And then I just want to take my piece, making sure that it's into the point of the paper, into that corner, so that my seam is going through, my point is going into the corner there. And again, I just take some pieces that I have. I'm going to find some fabrics that I want to use. So I'll start with this piece here. I think it's 2 inches wide. Yes, it's 2 inches. So I just want to cut a piece that's a little bit bigger than what I need. So I'll just trim that off. And then I will go sew this onto this seam. Put a pin to hold it. And I will be right back. I have my block stitched. I reduced my stitch length to 1.8. And then I had to do just some minor repositioning of my pins just to make sure I didn't run into anything in this top corner. And so now that I have this one done, I can just go ahead and finger press this seam open. And I don't worry about the iron right now. If I've got strings in my seams, I go ahead and try to get rid of many of them as I can. So I've got this side done. Next, I can continue to work on this side and go out, or I can go ahead and start on this side as well. So if I do my first stitch on this side, I'll go ahead and put my next one over here, because as I keep doing blocks, now I can start to alternate strips on both. I can put strips on both sides if I've got both sides already done. So I've got a pretty chunky strip on this side, so I'm going to put something that's more narrower on the other side. So I've got that down, and I'm just going to put a placement pin to hold it into place. And now I come back to this one. And this one is where I was using strips, where I used the 3 fabric strip, but it won't make any difference in the final scheme of things. It's just making my own fabric here. And so I want to use something just a tad wider. And again, I have something that's kind of angled out. So I will just cut a piece of that that's a little bit larger than what I need. And then I will put this onto here. So I'm just putting another placement pin to hold. Now, I will show you how I will continue these out in the next step. I've sewn my piece on. So again, I am just pressing my seam, just finger pressing. I am not using any iron because my fabric had a little stabilizer in it prior to stitching. I'm able to just, you know, finger press the seams open. I don't need them like super flat at this point. So from now on, I can go ahead and do strings on each side. Now, notice here that I've got raw edges sticking out. So when I place my piece for that one, I want to make sure that I'm not including these frayed ends into my piecing or into my actual seam line. So I'm just going through the stack, looking for something that I can use. Cut it just a little bit longer than what I need. And scissors might be a good idea here too. So I need something that was at least that size. So when I place this one down, I'm going to pull it back a little bit so that it's not in the fray area. And just put another placement pin. Now, because I am not dealing with the center seam anymore, I can also go ahead and place something on the opposite side. And so I have this piece here, and I think it's just a little bit wider than what I would like to use. So I'm just going to whack off a piece. And then I can just rough cut or use my ruler to cut a line, but I have like a little line from it being folded as a piece of binding, so I'm just going to use that and then go ahead and sew this piece onto the other side. And so I will do the same thing to this piece, and then I will sew these together, and then I will be back to show you my next step. So I have my pieces that I'm still finger pressing open. So that's my block 1. And here's my block number 2, finger pressing the seams open. And now I would like to stop and talk about technique on the blocks. I'm doing 2 different techniques on the blocks. On this first one, I am doing your traditional, when I put the fabric down, I'm actually stitching through the paper, and hopefully you can see the seam lines where I am stitching through the paper. Now when it comes time, when I finish this block and tear it all out, I will have to rip paper on all of those lines. But on this block, the only time that I've stitched on the paper is when I've had to stitch to anchor my centerpiece because I had no choice. From then on, as I've been piecing, on this particular block, I put my fabric here. But when I go to sew the seam, I flip the paper back and just use my 1/4 inch seam and stitch the seam. So this seam is not attached to the paper. And the same thing over on this side. I've stitched this down. Before I stitched it down, I flipped my paper back, stitched the seam with a 1/4 inch seam, and then when I come back to my area, I finger press over so I know what area I still need to cover, but I don't have to remove all of those seams. So for each block, I only have 2 stitching lines that I'll have to remove when it's sewn together. So now I got a little spot here, and I'm wondering if I have any corner triangles that might fit that. And it looks like this piece will fit. See if I can find anything else to give it some other color. So it looks like this piece will fit on the corner. So I'm going to sew this one onto my corner. And since I'm not sewing through the paper, I'm just going to pin and not worry about that corner. Now here I have a good little chunk of space because I still have raw edges that dip in further than down here. But again, I just leave all of these pieces. I don't worry about it. I'm just going to take something that's a little bit thicker than what I need. And if it doesn't work, then I'll go to something else that's just a tad bit thicker. And then I can always trim off the excess at the end. So that's why I keep a few of the thick ones still here, just in case. And then when I pin this down, I still, on this particular block, am only stitching through the fabrics. I'm not stitching through the paper, but I have my pins lined up with the raw my fabric lined up with all the raw edges. Again, we got another corner here. Trying to see if I can find something big enough. Look like this yellow will work. And on this particular block, I am stitching through all the paper, so I can just go ahead and pin. So I will go ahead and complete out these blocks, and I will show you the next step. Okay, I'm back. I have my 2 completed blocks, and I did add one more piece on this side to finish out the block. So now this is how the block looks on the back side. You should have fabric extending around the outer edges. And this is the one where the pieces are all sewn completely through the paper. And this is my second block. I got all of the pieces covered, but only the 2 center seams have been sewn to the paper. So I'm just going to start with this one. We know that this black is on the edge of the corner, so this corner is going to be where I'm going to start using it as a base for squaring up. So I know that I want my block to be 6.5 inches, so I'm going to put my 6.5 inch line along this bottom edge, and it's plumb with the edge of the block that was square. So I'm going to cut this way. Whoops, I got a piece of fabric that's tucked under. See, that's why you need certain things to happen on screen. Not everything I'm going to cut out. That's why you need to see these things, because they do happen in real life. So I had my fabric flipped under, and I did not get to cut that little brown piece off. So now I'm going to, so I've cut just one side. So I'm going to line up the side that I just cut with this corner down here, and I'm now going to cut off 2 sides. I could have cut off 2 sides before, but I just wanted to take it slow for starting out. So there's my third one, and I need to cut one more side at 6.5 inches wide. So I just want to make sure that any line is on the bottom and that I'm 6.5 inches in from the edge. And then this is my completed block. Okay, so I'll go ahead and square the second one up. And this is the one where the paper isn't touching, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to set this up so that I have 6.5 going along this bottom edge of the paper, as well as 6.5 inches from the outside edge. And then this time I'm going to cut the two sides, rotate my mat 180 degrees, and then I'm going to cut the other two sides. So I've got 6.5 line coming this way, as well as a 6.5 line going the opposite direction. To make sure, you want to make sure everything is nice and plumb. Okay. So these are my two blocks that I have cut. And when I put my block units together, they will go in this manner. And you can see where my center seams are going to match when I sew them together. So it doesn't matter if I put which one on either side. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to sew those together. So they only requested that we make 2 of these, so I will send these 2 into the gill, and then I'm going to make a few more. So if I make a few more, I'll go ahead and add a photo at the end of the other blocks just laid out. I will not be sewing them together into units, but thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you with my next block. Bye bye.